Welcome, everybody. So happy that you are here. My name is S.L. Ziegler. I'm the head of digital programs and services at LSU Libraries, and I'm the project manager for the LDL as Data grant, which makes today's speaker series event possible. So by way of introduction today, I'll say a few quick things about the grant and how the Louisiana Digital Library fits into it all. And as well as the following housekeeping items. So first, I'll just remind everybody that we did agree to the code of conduct, which states in part harassment of participants will not be tolerated in any form. Should we need to, we'll simply shut the session down, and Michelle has agreed to just talk without an audience, and then we'll share the recording. It's never come to this, but it's good to have a plan. Please do use the chat at any time to ask questions, especially for this talk, which I understand will be, we have the ability to make it a little bit more interactive. My colleague Leah Powell Duncan will help us read these during the Q&A portion of today's event. This talk is being recorded and will be available on the LDL YouTube channel soon. All right, we'll have it up and we'll send links out to all the registrants as well as push it out to on all the social media platforms. And lastly, we'll be using this hashtag that you see on the screen, this LDL as data, should you want to contribute and follow along on Twitter. So we're here together because the collections as data are part of the whole grant. So with funds from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation re-granted to the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, LSU Libraries, and the Louisiana Digital Library as part of a cohort charged with creating examples of how to operationalize the use of digital cultural heritage materials as data. So this is just an amazing cohort full of wonderful people doing fantastic projects. You see the link here at collections.github.io/part2whole. You can see all the other great people that we have the privilege of working with in different capacities. Please do take a look as you can. Our part of the Collections as Data Part to Whole project is investigating what it would mean to make the entirety of the Louisiana Digital Library available as data. So for context, the LDL is Louisiana's statewide digital repository for cultural heritage material with over 30 participants, including public libraries, academic libraries, archives, and museums. And we know that a project of this scale and complexity will include both a technical angle, a very, very large technical angle, and there's a lot of work to do in that area, but much more central to, I guess, today's talk and some of the other the speaker series in general is the community work that this also entails. Right? So because we're thinking about what we can get out of the LDL in terms of data and use and reuse for various forms, we also want to think very carefully about what goes into the LDL. And doing so invites questions about digitization selection, conscientious metadata remediation, as well as evaluations of which collections should not, in fact, be widely shared, because we know that not everything should be treated the same way. And a lot of our speakers have touched on these aspects in different ways. Today's speaker is going to help us think out another angle of this, which I'm very excited about. And we know that all of these angles is a thing that many of us in the field are trying to think about, which is why we are so happy to be able to open this to all of our colleagues. So before I introduce today's speaker, I want to take a moment to invite you to our next and final speaker series event. So closing out the series, we'll have Sharon Leon, the Associate Professor of History and Digital Humanities at Michigan State University, who will join us on February 11th. Her presentation, From Event to Dataset, Perspective, Structure, and the Problem of Representation and Data-Driven Digital History, will use records related to the history of enslavement as a case study to explore the life cycle of historian-created data and the ways that our insights about the past might be enriched by applying computational techniques. Sharon's presentation, again, will be the last. This has been a fantastic series. And all of the speakers to date, you can watch and rewatch on the LDL YouTube channel. And now I am so happy to introduce today's speaker, Michele Reilly. Michele is professor and digital projects coordinator at the University of Arkansas. Before that, she was associate dean of libraries at Central Washington University Library and the head of digital services at the University of Houston Libraries. Excuse me. Michele holds a BS in social sciences from Washington State University and MLS from Indiana University and is currently finishing her PhD at Humboldt University in Berlin, Germany. Michelle's research focuses on the assessment of digital repository systems, objects, and workflows, as well as emerging technologies that facilitate the discovery and use of digital cultural heritage materials. I'm so thankful for this research. Right, as a field, we have a long way to go in knowing even how to know our users and our uses of digital collections. So I very much look forward to this talk. And now, Michelle, I turn it over to you for your presentation, Assessing Users and Reuses for LDL Practitioners.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I will share my screen. I want to start really quickly with thanking everybody for attending. I really appreciate it. Sometimes these things are one of those things where you go, is anybody really going to show up or not? So I'm happy to see everybody here. I do want to also let you know that part of this is that what I'm going to talk about today is part of my dissertation. So thank you very much for indulging me in practicing my defense at the same time. Let's see. I don't know how. Can I just share my screen? Okay. So I'm going to just start right in and talk about how my work and my research focuses on assessing users and reuses. This is for anyone, not just for the LDL community. Anybody can use this as a way in which to sort of dive in to see who their users are and see how they can sort of get a little bit more information about how people are sharing digital library content over the web. So I'm going to talk about how digital libraries were developed and a little bit about their purposes. I'm going to talk about the impact digital libraries have, who are the users, and why do they use digital library materials, and what tools we can use to determine who they are and what purposes they use. And then and what meaning can we take away from our users so that we can make collection decisions and we can make metadata decisions. And then there's some limitations to these tools. They're not easy, but there's some ways around it. And then I'll talk a little bit about my current research about trying to make it more user-friendly for our community to sort of delve into who's using these things on the web. So digital library development they were kind of designed originally for scholarly and research purposes. In 1945, Bush wrote that he had a hypothetical theory about storing all of his books and records and communications, and then sort of making those mechanical so people could see them other than him. And he could store all this, and it would be flexible, and it would be speedy, and it would supplement his memory. And let's keep that word memory in mind, because it has a lot to do with how people find our digital library materials. And then Borgman in 1999 started going, well, you know what? Now these digital electronic libraries that were started by NASA and started by some others, and now the technology is kept up, was really kind of saying, okay, now we're going to say, we're going to go and we're going to have librarians. And then the GLAM world got involved. So the impacts of this is people are finding this stuff. How they're finding it, we don't really know, right? We assume they're going and Googling. We assume they're coming to our homepages and they're finding these materials. Really, it's mostly the first one. They're going to Google and they're saying, I need an image of something. But it's making an impact on the everyday curator, the everyday person who is using this stuff for their own homes. They're not all using it as research for their papers or their scholarly research or their historians. I think it was Joe Baudouin, who said, you know, her art historians were not finding what they were needing, and they weren't really using it. Now, this was several years ago, and digital libraries have come a long way. But it's really important to know how they're finding our materials so that we can make sure they can continue to find them, and we can put up things that they need. So I define users as the people who are searching, discovering, and downloading images from digital libraries to fulfill various objectives, and for lots of different pursuits: personal, educational, work-related. And then reuse as using that image in a setting that is not original to its platform. So as we go and search for these things using reverse image lookup, I don't consider, reuse for me is if a digital library itself reuses its own content. That's really not my area of study. I'm saying they're using their own content, that's awesome. But anybody who uses it beyond that, that's where I'm interested in, because those are the users that I'm focusing on at this time. So what tools can we use? Well, there are several tools available, and they've been used for a long time: focus groups, online and paper surveys, and web tools. The problems with each of these are you get low response rate, particularly for online surveys. So it's really hard to really get a use out of it. And then web tools. Unless you can put focus groups together easily, a lot of us who are at academics have to go through what's called the Irb process, and that is not always really quick. So I wanted to come out with or find a way that it would make it easier for us to sort of delve in. And so we looked at, my co-researcher and I, several years ago, using reverse image lookup. This is Google Images. And so we're going to talk a little bit about it. And if you guys, some of you who want to have a favorite image, maybe in a little bit, we will go through and we'll interactively look and show you step by step on how we go and look for materials and how I find out who's using them, okay? So here are the three major search engines for images. We all probably know Google Images. We all probably used it in the past. There's also TinEye, which is another reverse image search. And then Microsoft Bing has one. But then Pinterest also has one, and there's several others. These are just the big ones. I think Google indexes somewhere or has about 8.5 million searches a day, or billion searches. I mean, it's huge. So that one has the most images, and so that's the one I usually focus on. So what is reverse image lookup? Reverse image lookup searches the visual characteristics. So it looks for blobs of color, it looks for shape, it looks for texture, it looks for pixels. And then it also, depending, it'll use metadata from the image that's already available. So if there is metadata attached to that image, particularly XF metadata, it will try and find that also. It loves file names. So FYI, when you go to file name, reverse image lookup loves file names. It's the first thing it checks. So if your file name is descriptive, it's going to try and look for that too. And we'll see we'll see an example of that in a moment. So this is what it looks for, and it tries to match those to its already database that it's already indexed. And that's where you get this, here's images that look similar, or here's images that match. And we'll look at some of that in a moment also. So that's how reverse image lookup works. Each of them has their own algorithms, and they each have their own problems. So I don't know if this is big enough for you to see, but I grabbed an image. And this is the one where I just dropped and dragged the image over. And if you look right here, oh, how do I back up? Okay, one more. If you look right there in the search box, this is where I dragged the image over. The image has no metadata or a file name for it to grab, so it made its own. And Google does this. It will make its own metadata stream. It recognized that this was an ironclad ship from the Civil War. And basically, the first image that came up, well, the first searches, the first couple of them are always these sort of like ads or their Wikipedia. So if you've uploaded this image into Wikipedia, it's going to come up to the first part of the search almost all the time. And then it's going to have you look at these visually similar images. Chances are maybe the first one or the second one is going to be your image. Sometimes if it's a very, very popular image and it has been shared widely, it's going to be more. But the ones you're going to find are these ones way down at the bottom that says pages that include matching images. And that's where you're going to find who's actually used them, okay? You don't have to go too much clicking into doing that. I also use a text string. And this is the text string I have found really is helpful. So I used the title of this image, a bit of the title of this image, who took the image, the creator, and the date. And this actually comes up with a search that actually has more of the images in it. And it narrows the search down. So I found that to be a really good way. So before you start any kind of a search, I would suggest picking the image you want and then trying to make sort of a criteria. Who are you looking for? So that you can sort that material and find out who's you want. So in my latest Google searches, I had the top user group as industry. Those are people who are literally selling the images. And then commerce as the reuse type. This is a real standard. Several people have used these sort of criteria in past papers. I've used it 2 or 3 times, and I think several others have used it. And it's a good way to know what you're looking at before you even start. So having a criteria is always good. So we're going to talk about some known limitations. One of the biggest known limitations to Google particularly is in several years ago, the European Union sued Google for copyright or they had whatever their European thing is. And Google changed their algorithm. And so when you saw that all this industry is here. That is because they've changed their algorithm to prioritize over personal use of the image. So you have to dig pretty deep in your search results to be able to find this personal group. It's just the way Google has changed over the last 5 years since I wrote about them. And it was really interesting to see. So what I was hoping to do was show you how I went about ways to search and how to search, and just doing a search for you that I have, this particular search. So if I can stop this video, how do I make it small? So we will go to my messy desktop, so please ignore that. And I have a Google Images. So the first thing I do is when I go to download an image, I do a save as or I do a download feature. That way it saves the metadata behind the image. So this is the image that I grabbed the other day. So you can see it over here.
Sorry, Michelle, again, this might be just my view, but I just want to be sure, what do you hope that we can see right now?
I'm hoping that you can see my desktop where I've got an image up. You can't see any of that?
No, we still see the PowerPoint just out of presenter mode. Maybe if you minimize that.
Okay, let me go to the PowerPoint.
Or if you open a new share.
Oh, I can do that? Okay. New share. Oh, okay. Let's see. I want that one. Is that better?
Much better.
Okay. So this is the image that I'll start over again. This is the image I grabbed from the LDL digital library. And I grabbed it because I recognized what this was. I had grabbed several others and couldn't get much in the way of it. When I downloaded it, you can see where the image file name is right here, where, and we'll take a quick look at the details. And so this is, the title is not in the file name, so it doesn't grab the title when you grab it. So you have to be really careful about that. So this is what I grabbed. And now I will go over and over that. And we will move it into Google Images. So as you can see, it automatically fills in the ironclad ships because Google Images recognizes that as a term that has been used several times in metadata on other images like it. And then if you go to matching images, then you'll get to where the people who have actually used that image in different ways. A lot of it is Pinterest, a lot of it is eBay. You'll see a lot of these rare historical photographs ones. You'll see Wikipedia a lot. Getty Images is up there a lot. And so you want to go to one of these, you want to look at all of them. I look at all of them to see who's doing what, where they're getting their images from. So I've already looked at getting the images, and I can tell you right now they got it from their own collection. And what they're doing is they're selling it. So if you come down and we try and find the image that we were just looking at, I think it's right here. Oh, and there is the image, and they're doing it as a sale. So they would be considered industry and commerce in my criteria. This looks like it might not be, which is exactly, this is the kind of people I'm looking for. This looks closer to a blog post or some kind of information, which is, oh, they moved this in. But they also don't, this is where they got it from. So these people are just giving you information. It doesn't look like they're selling anything. So this is kind of nice to know that this is an interesting one for somebody. Pinterest, I love Pinterest because this is what's very interesting about Pinterest is you can get to find out who these people are, kind of get their an idea of what their interests are so that you can go on. It's also nice to see what they use as metadata tags for their own boards. So they're curating their own collections, and in curating their own collections, we can get some information about what to put into our metadata so that they can find it on our sites. So that's always a good thing to do. So then I just look at all of these up to 50 or 100 of them, depending on my research, and then I try and grab up and understand who's using the materials and for what they're using them. Or go back to this. Did I do that right? So as you can see, there were some known limitations. And it is mostly because of Google. Now, TNI does a little differently, and you might be able to find a little different because they index stuff. But be prepared. TNI is also very international, so you're going to get a lot of things from Russia and a lot of things from the Czech Republic, and there might be, depending on your anti-software, you might be interesting. So what I'm working on now is developing image search strategies to offset these limitations. Mostly it revolves around file names and metadata that can be embedded in the image in order to get in Google and other images to allow that image to flow, or that metadata to flow across, so that we can do sort of a back search for that. It's a little tricky because it gets into what kind of metadata we write and how we present that and where we put the metadata within the image. Embedded metadata is a little easier. Written metadata, Google doesn't really go into our databases and look too hard at that. It's not its first priority. I'm also in the midst of writing some script that will automatically sort of use the search engines to do collection-wide searching and spit out reports. And I'm in the midst of that now. And that's where we are now. Would anybody have an image they would like to go and search for it? And
While
I,
people,
I'm going to stop sharing.
Michelle, I was just going to say, while people are thinking about which images they would like to volunteer for us to try to find out in the wild, I wonder if you could just say a little bit about um, Zach has one. I wonder if you could say just a little bit about the types of collections you've been using to do this research. For instance, you're at the University of Arkansas. Are you using their digital library a lot, or are you
No,
just sort of looking globally?
no, globally. Actually, most of the images that I use are from Europe, and most of them lately have been out of Europeana and their member libraries. Lot, I think I have 25 or 26 images that I looked at just from the museum in Amsterdam. They're fairly prolific about doing that. I like to do that because they offer an opportunity to download the image and all the metadata at the same time. And a lot of here in the United States, they don't do that. It's harder to get the metadata, and I'm usually looking for metadata.
Thank you for that. It looks like we have a couple of options in the chat. I don't know if you can see that. It looks like Zach is suggesting an image, which might be good practice.
Oh, Bernie. Is that the one?
That's the one.
Okay, let's. Okay. Ooh, how does it want me to save this and where? Well, I'll put it on my desktop for now. Okay. So let's take a look at Bernie's image here. Well, you gotta love Bernie. Bernie's been everywhere lately, hasn't he? So I will share my screen so we can go and look for Bernie. Can you guys all see my screen?
We don't see it yet. I wonder if you could try again.
Okay, let me check it again. Screen share. This one. Okay. Now can you see it? Awesome.
Yes, we can see it.
So here's Bernie. Well, it seems like there's a whole lot. The New York Times, NPR, NBC, Washington Post, Slate. It's all about his mittens. These are all obviously news organizations. But let's see if there's anybody. Art news. That seems interesting. So they found theirs in Getty. This is a news organization, or they're some sort of publication, popular culture publication. Here, this is the excerpt of that image. The one thing I'm always looking for is how they titled an image. And so, oops, their excerpt doesn't want to do that. So they titled it Getty Images. You can see right here. Not very informative, but that's their way of hoping that people will be drawn back to them, okay? And their way of putting their sort of stamp on it without putting a watermark on it. Because these people probably paid Getty to have that image. The art world could have changed this if they could have changed the image title or the image file name to lead back to themselves. Most people do change the file names. That is probably 56 or 58% of people who use images from the web will change the file name before they upload it onto a blog or their Pinterest or something. They do that 9 times out of 10 for memory reasons. It helps them remember it in their own file system at home. That said, we would love for them to not do that. We would love for them to give us credit where credit is due. More people do not cite images than you cite images, and we all should know that. Most of these are news organizations, Japan News, and that sort of thing. So you kind of know that they're popular culture. In my classification, they would be popular culture publications. So there's that image. We could actually look at the metadata a little more closely. Hold on just a sec while my computer thinks about what it wants to show you. With XF tool to find out more about the image itself and what Google wants to look at. And so if we look at, try and find the image. Here's our Bernie image. Here's the XF metadata for that image. And you can see where the file name is just Bernie because the gentleman who downloaded it just called it Bernie. He downloaded it. But this is interesting because most people don't put this much description in their metadata, where it's image description, former president sits on the bleachers. This would have had to have been added by the person who took the photo when they took the photo or when they manipulated the photo. And you can't change it. So this is something that they put on there. So unless you're looking for it, you're not gonna know. And so when Brandon took this photo, he added this metadata. That's not a big deal, exception to the fact that because this is embedded metadata, this will actually be picked up by the search engine. So when you're scanning in objects and you have the opportunity to add a description or add some sort of creator or a date, it's really a good idea. Anybody else? Okay. Stop sharing that. Well, I'm not going to.
Cindy, if you're still willing to share, oh, I'm sorry, you did. Okay, fantastic. So Cindy did put a JPEG in the chat.
Did she? Okay, I gotta find it. So you've got it's the medium-sized JPEG. Sounds like you got that from the LDL library because that's what all of theirs downloads as. Am I correct? Okay. So here you go. So this image, Google doesn't recognize this image as much. It thinks it's just a guy, this command. So you'll see the first two here on Wikipedia, that it's taking it from what it perceives as just being a man. It also doesn't give us anything below. It ends right here at visually similar. That is because it hasn't been shared across. Now, since I don't know what I'm looking at, so this is the image we're looking for, is this gentleman, and it looks like Huey Long to me. Am I right? Hello, Nessa. My dog has come to visit. So it's not in here. I mean, we can see if somebody spots it, like yell. But it looks like Huey Long signing something. So if I can get a little bit of the metadata off of the file. So there's not a lot of metadata behind this that's embedded in the photo. So this would be an image that I would just assume that either it has not been shared much or enough to bring it into the rankings. We could do, if somebody would tell me the date on it, if you have their date.
Cindy says the date is 1934.
Okay. Let's see if we can come a little closer. Well, he was a big character, as we all know. So there's lots of images about him. But Google search won't, it's too broad. And so that's another limitation of Google Images. And that's why it's really important to put as much embedded metadata as you can, so that it tells Google what to look for. Right now, it can't figure out which Huey Long one you want to use.
Yeah, Michelle, so it sounds like, just sort of as a general rule, if we were to drop an image and redo the steps that you just did, if Google has to sort of guess, like say gentleman, and you get really generic gentleman returns, and there's nothing to scroll down to from specifics, we can just sort of guess from that the image just hasn't been very widely shared, which itself is something to know.
Right? Exactly.
Okay.
It's you can put all kinds of like log data and that kind of stuff on your sites to get statistics, but to get this deep and to find the actual image that's being, if it's shared, you really need to go through these sort of steps to say, okay, but this image hasn't gotten shared a lot, or it would have risen up higher. The more it's shared, the higher it's going to go in the rankings at Google. Google is literally a popularity contest. And so consequently, you're going to want to, and I'll give you a tip on how to get this image shared. If you really want this image shared, the tip is go put it into Wiki Commons, okay? Share it on Pinterest, share it in your own accounts, share it on Twitter, share it on Facebook. That will move it all into a higher ranking, so that that image will show up in these results faster and higher. So the more you can put it into blog posts, particularly, and that way you can, when you put it into blog posts, make that file name be the descriptive and give it where it came from, so that people, when they click on it, they'll come back to it. So, but it also moves it up into the algorithm. So share it widely and share it across social media platforms as much as you can. Now, Pinterest and Facebook and Twitter will all strip the metadata. And the reason why they do that is for privacy reasons. They don't want people like, you know, I don't know, some popular actor that uploads an image from their house, because it'll geotag it. So it strips those out, so people can't backfire that and find out where they are.
Well, fantastic. So I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
I want to say all of this is fantastic. I wonder, now that we have about 10 minutes, right about 9 minutes left, maybe perhaps we could open it to any questions from our attendees.
Yeah, there's a question from Elizabeth. She asks, Michele, do you know which of the major repository platforms, such as Islandora, Content DM, etc., keep the embedded metadata when you download as a user versus scrubbing the embedded metadata like the LDL does when it changes the file name when you download it?
So, yes, Content DM will keep a good portion of it. You can get a lot of it. Islandora is your platform. It looks like, I haven't used it a lot. It looks like it will scrub it if you, and that might be a settings thing. You may want to look at your settings. I know that the platform used by several of the Europeana will keep the embedded metadata. The Library of Congress keeps most of its metadata attached to the image. And so that there is not one particular one, but most of them keep it all. Now, at the, you can get your metadata from the Islandora site that you have. You have to click on the details above. It doesn't let you download that metadata, which is, you know, I'm nosy, so I want that metadata. So most do. Most will let you download the metadata that comes with it. It's still attached. Anybody else have any other questions about it? I know it's kind of weird research, but it lets me know who's moving things, who's using things across the web. And if they're using it, that's what we want, right? That's our justification. This is why this is important to us. We're getting this information not only about important topics, but also about ourselves, right? We're letting people know what our collections are. Back when I first started in this, it was 2008, 2009. It was all about letting people know what the collections were, so that they would come into our special collections. It sort of changed over time, or the reason why we do this I kind of feel like has changed over time, and correct me if it's wrong. We would still love our people to come into our buildings, but if they can't, because they're in India, or they're in Africa, or they're somewhere and they can't get into our buildings, getting our information out there tells them about us, but it also puts us as part of the global village of information. And I think that's good.
Well, Michele, let me take a moment just to thank you again. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. One more question just came in.
Yes, Jody says, ideally, Google Images would find at least the image that's in the LDL, what can be done to make images in our repositories indexed by Google?
You're right. And I did pick an image earlier before I picked the ironclad of Buffalo Bill Cody, thinking, well, everybody knows Buffalo Bill Cody. That one's going to show up right away. Well, lots of pictures of Buffalo Bill Cody showed up, but only one image showed up as an exact match. And that was from your library, from your digital library. That was it. That particular, so to get it to index the repository's images, like I said, you really have to share it yourself, and you have to get it out there as much as possible. Now, there are ways, and I encourage everybody to look at how to optimize your search, right? Go look up how to SEO, search engine optimization, because every image that you upload should be optimized for your search. That will move your repository up also. So make sure that your repository homepage, particularly the homepage, is optimized. And that's a matter of a metadata background. So I would encourage that, because that way, when people search for the Buffalo Bill Cody, they'll get you guys. And that image didn't show up in Wikipedia. It didn't show up in Pinterest. It didn't show up anywhere else. So my thought was, well, it's nice that the only image did show up. Like we saw in the previous example, it didn't show up in anything. The Buffalo Bill Cody did show up. So optimizing your search, please do that. Particularly your homepage.
Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you, Michele. And I'll go ahead, and unless there's any other questions, we're just about at time. So let me thank you again for participating, for all the great knowledge that you shared. I hope that this was helpful for you also, and maybe as practice for your defense.
It kind of solidified what I'm going to talk about when I have to go up against, people who really do this. But yes, it did. Thank you.
Fantastic. And thank you everybody for attending. Have a wonderful day.
I hope everybody got something out of it. And if I can help in any way, please let me know. Just contact me. I'm happy to help.